What is up? Is your boy Johnny Shreve, IFBB Pro, and Mr. Tell Like It Is. Mental health is a serious thing. Let's get into it.
I'll read a comment on social media directed at me, I guess, about me. And it's from nameless, faceless profile. And I begin to fantasize about what it would be like and how much sublime pleasure I would receive in hurting that person at a deep physical and emotional level. Steroids, the honor culture comes from maleness. It comes from testosterone and other brain structures, of course, but the more testosterone, and steroids are all testosterone-like molecules. If you have 10 times the testosterone-like action affecting your brain, your proclivity to falling into honor culture-like behavioral patterns and thought patterns increases to an enormous extent.
I can relate a lot. I understand like the little bit of the dramatics in in his delivery, and it helps actually tell the story a lot more. He's not lying in terms of like that feeling you get or thoughts that happen when you use steroids. The thing is, dwelling on the feeling, fantasizing on the feeling or the thoughts and those emotions, and not necessarily reacting to them, but like mentally or even just kind of physically kind of carrying a little bit of that rage when you kind of see him talk about it. And for me, I can relate. I spent the last 10 years in therapy. I was actually lucky and blessed, actually was doing therapy throughout bodybuilding and a little bit before that. Because those feelings that Mike gets, those like thoughts of rage and anger, and they don't come into my head anymore. Now, let me tell you this right now, guys. I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. I went 32 years undiagnosed. I spent a majority of my life carrying out violent thoughts, violent emotions. So understanding that like in my household when I was younger, emotions like anger or the emotions that came after or came with being disciplined, they were shown by either yelling or being spanked. Now, I say spanked very lightly. So I grew up expressing myself violently. If I was angry, I expressed it violently. It was either getting into a fight or actually cutting myself. My saving grace was therapy, God, and being able to understand how to manage those thoughts. Because when it comes down to it, mental health isn't something you just cure yourself of. You don't just wake up one day and you're like, I'm cured. You go through being able to manage your thoughts, manage who you are, manage those emotions or things that come into your brain before acting them out. Now, there's nothing wrong with having thoughts go into your head. Nothing wrong with that at all. It's actually healthy. There's no way you can stop certain things from going into your head. That's how it works. Your brain and your eyes pick up thousands of things on a day-to-day basis that you're unconscious of. And then eventually a thought pops into your head because your eyes are kind of scanning certain things, and that thing that pops in your head is like, oh my God, I can't believe I thought of that. And it goes away for the most part. You probably think of something that's kind of weird and it goes away. So for me, when those kind of things happen, they don't go past anything but that's just a thought. And that's because of, going to therapy. I was in dialectical behavioral therapy, and it helped me manage those thoughts and emotions. Pretend you're sitting at a harborfront, a waterfront, whatever. This is kind of the analogy I like to envision in terms of thoughts. Think of like boats as thoughts. They're going through your harbor and they pass. You don't get on that boat. You don't go for a ride on that emotion. Because for me, going on a ride like that brings me into a state of spiraling, and it could take me a day or even 2 weeks to a month to get myself out of. So for me, it's extremely important that I manage my emotions. I manage myself being in the moment in those things. And when I look at this entire video in terms of like how he even expressed himself, I'm looking at it like, is this a net positive or net negative the way he's saying it? And just the way he's saying it, it brings life to how he feels. You can see how deeply he feels about those things, because he says he doesn't actually act it out. Just because you're not acting it out doesn't mean that it's healthy to sit on it and fantasize about it. There's one thing about having a thought go into your mind and then it leaving, but there's another thing about sitting on it and fantasizing about it, and then that thing continuing over and over and over again. And he says this is the only thing that happens when he's on steroids, which means that every single time he does steroids, he has to go through this.
Because the average person doesn't have that feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So have you been able to figure out in hindsight why you were so taken by being big?
I have a few ideas. I'll caveat this idea with the following. A retrospective analysis of why you do things is almost always grotesquely flawed. Most of why we do things is a combination of variables we don't understand and genetics. And so like the whole life story arc, well, it all started on a teacher in the 3rd grade. Like that's bullshit. That's a backwards justification you made up. So the following statements are backwards justifications I'm making up as just tentative, very not sure hypotheses. Here's a fun story. This will be fun. When I was small, young, my dad would wrestle with me a lot. And he would always let me win in the end. It was great. He's a great person. And he would always tell me that I was strong and capable. And then in like end of elementary school, all the way through the beginning of high school, I was bullied. Honestly, like literally a few times. I think I was just the wrong person to bully, because that very temporary state of disenfranchisement and powerlessness, I'm never going to be bullied again.
Unfortunately, too many people can think back to a time when they were bullied in some way, whether it was a day or whether it was something that was a bit more prolonged. Some of my best friends have talked, they've been to therapy, and their therapists have, I think, figured out through some of that retrospective analysis, which obviously a lot of the time isn't accurate, that much of their adult behavior today correlates back to an early experience in such a way where they were made to feel a certain way in that social environment where we're so sort of formative.
Yeah.
Let me tell you something right now, and I think that I don't know the host of the podcast name, but that's what therapists and psychologists do, psychiatrists do. There is a retrospective analysis of the past, and a lot of the things in the past do contribute to what's going on in the future. Now, does it say that's exactly what happened? No, but it does give us some insight as to what are the underlying issues, as to why we're doing the certain things we are doing right now. There is some kind of trigger event or events that have happened that shape the fabric of who you are right now.
I have a few incidents. One probably stands out the most. So it was a kid named Darren, and he was black. Almost certainly fatherless. Preternaturally physically developed for his age. He was 10, so was I. We were just wrestling. I wrestled with everyone. He beat me in wrestling. He was the only person I believe to beat me in wrestling my whole childhood. He beat me in wrestling, and that was cordial because they get this in wrestling. But he had braces, I think, and he cut himself while wrestling with me, and he was bleeding out of his mouth. And then he got really upset about that, and he like kind of stood over me, and he was like, you little this and that, like you did this to me, like I'm gonna F you up and all this other stuff. When he did that to me, my whole perspective on the world changed for years. I was like a confident, happy kid. And then after that, for 4 or 5 years, maybe longer, all of my confidence drained out. I became introverted. I am not naturally introverted. His presence alone reminded me that I need to keep my head down. And I remember fantasizing when I was in like 6th grade, I think, like a year later, like, wouldn't it be great if I brought a baseball bat to school and just broke his legs and just kept hitting his legs to where he'd never walk right ever again because he wronged me that bad?
We have Dr. Mike at the beginning of the video saying that, when he's on high, super physiological amounts of steroids, he has fantasizing thoughts about hurting people, XYZ. And when he's off, it's completely fine. But he knows when he's on it, it just that happens, and it sucks that it does, but he just got to go through it. And we ask why, quickly says there's no real, retrospective analysis you can do. They're very flawed, and there's nothing there. You can't really go to the past and figure things out or find out why and give answers to now. And then explains to us a story about him being bullied, and he didn't even get punched being bullied. Someone just sat over him, and he had the same language that he did when he was talking about fantasizing about hurting someone. And it's the exact same story if you think about it. The story here is he fantasized about beating that kid's legs over and over and over and over again. Now, was Dr. Mike on steroids then? No, he wasn't. He wasn't at all. He was in his normal mind as a high school kid that is now fantasizing about breaking some kid's legs because that kid stood over him with a bloody mouth from his braces that he probably got accidentally rubbed when they were wrestling. So are you telling me that there's nothing in the past at all that might have anything that contributes to the way he's thinking right now in the present on physiological amounts, super physiological amounts of steroids? Having a retrospective analysis, AKA just therapy, psychology, something done, counseling done to go back and see why you're having these thoughts. Now, you don't have to go back and revisit traumatic times in life to figure out why things are happening now. Having some idea of past events that are currently still happening now, because we now know that Dr. Mike has had these thoughts beforehand, before being on steroids. And his quick dismissal of a retrospective analysis of, finding out why things happened in the past kind of throws things off, because there's obviously a link to the past and the present. It's extremely important that we are doing something to help our mental health, self-awareness, emotional intelligence, being able to manage our thoughts, our emotions, being able to acknowledge there's an underlying issue that's happening that needs to discontinue. And you guys, there's some closing remarks I wrote here. Mental health is key to overall well-being, whether it's daily stress, past traumas, or things like steroid use. It's important that we address your mental state. Therapy and self-awareness can help you manage tough thoughts and emotions, but prioritizing mental health isn't just about feeling better. It's about living a balanced life and reaching your goals with a clear mind. Take care of your mind and the rest will follow. Anyway, guys, until next time, you know how it is. Iron sharpens iron, progressive overload your life. In the meantime, keep dream chasing. Peace.